Today, we're delighted to be joined by all of you, and in particular to be joined by our President, Professor Dara Keogh, by representatives from the Department of Education and Skills, by elected representatives, by staff from the Educate Together National Office and Educate Together schools, and of course by their supporters as well, by representatives from schools from around the country, from the 4 provinces, from school management bodies, from the support services, from patron bodies, from unions, from my staff in the Institute of Education and the wider Dublin City University community, and from colleagues from other HEIs around the country, and of course stakeholders and those who have an interest in education. It's a great day for us, and it's one that we're very excited about, and it's one that we've been looking forward to for a long time. It's a relatively straightforward outline of the day. We will have 3 speakers. We'll be joined by Professor Anne Looney, the Executive Dean of the Dublin City University Institute of Education, by Dr. Shivaun O'Brien, who's been the principal investigator on this very important project, and excuse me, by Dr. Emer, Dr. Emer Nolan, who's the CEO of Educate Together. We'll also have a video to show you, which summarizes a lot of the work is done and has a large input from many of those who are involved in this project. So at the beginning of today, I'd like to open up the floor first to the Executive Dean of the Dublin City University Institute of Education, Professor Anne Looney.
Thank you very much, Joe. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everybody. And you're very welcome to this afternoon's event, which effectively launches the quality framework and the work that was done by, as Joe said, led by Shivaun O'Brien and the community of Educate Together schools that are behind this quality framework. Now, while I am delighted to join everybody this afternoon, I'm somewhat conflicted because wherever you work in an education system, whether that is in higher education, further education, early childhood, you name the sector, the words quality framework never really gladden the heart. In fact, if you're to ask teachers or professionals who work in education, if you were to say, we're going to a launch of a quality framework, probably you'd be deafened by the silence of Prosecco corks staying in their bottle, because they tend to be words that don't really excite us. They're guaranteed to generate anxiety. And I tested this out with colleagues yesterday and said, when you think quality framework, how do you feel? And they said anxious. And I said, and if I was to throw ethos in the mix as well, they said, well, that would just finish it off entirely. Because not alone are we attempting in this project to launch a quality framework, we're doing so in the area of that most intangible of entities. And intangible and taken for granted, the area of ethos, which in itself can generate a deafening silence without the added anxiety of quality frameworks. But quality frameworks are now an accepted part of the policy architecture of most developed education systems, as they work as tools for governance, as parts of quality assurance mechanisms. And they also serve regulatory purposes. And in many systems, they're also drivers for change. They're popular in Ireland, from special education to early childhood education to digital education. And of course, the mothership of quality frameworks referenced in the one being launched today, the Looking at Our Schools framework, which works as both a shaper and driver of practice in primary and post-primary schools, fundamental as it is to school inspection and self-evaluation. The most common criticism and probably the source of anxiety about quality frameworks comes from performativity. The idea that in order to meet the standard, the energy I used generating the evidence that I had met the standard unfortunately meant I had no energy left to actually meet the standard. So in other words, getting to the standard, providing the evidence, displaces the practice that the quality framework was designed to support. And I'm always fond of Foucault's, I think they call it double individualization, but Foucault's accusation that how you know a really good quality framework is it convinces the individual who is the object of the change that they have in fact chosen the change. And many quality frameworks, many education professionals find that quality frameworks can work in that way. To counterbalance those criticisms, then the most effective quality frameworks, and indeed as this one would do, are grounded in a process, not in a product. How the standards are developed and how they are to be used and by whom become critical in the effectiveness of quality frameworks themselves. And this project represents not just a framework, but a developmental process, a piloting, and a proposal for how schools can use and own this so that it becomes a genuine support for quality in school ethos. Indeed, if quality frameworks had quality frameworks, I would propose that this one would represent highly effective practice. I nearly said Carlsberg. If Carlsberg did quality frameworks, they might indeed represent this one because it's so embedded in the process. And I think it's particularly important for this quality framework that it represents that the process is highly effective, not because it allows itself to be represented as a number, as a Likert scale, but because the process represents the values it is attempting to codify. I was struck in the video that you'll see later on, I've had a sneak preview, where Emer Nolan talks about the founding story of Educate Together over 50 years ago, a group of individuals who had a vision and then had a school. And how do you ensure that that vision of those original founding group, that vision continues to inform the work of Educate Together schools today? How do you make it work for 96 primary schools, 17 post-primary schools, and 30,000 learners? So that original vision has now become, the Educate Together was an initiative, it then was a developing system, and now it is a well-developed and established system. So how do you represent that vision? Well, you codify it in some way, and the quality framework and the standards are an attempt to codify that. So a quality framework can help with the codification, but how we avoid the performativity is that the ethos that is represented, that the values it attempts to codify must be represented in the processes that underpin the frameworks. So the process of the engagement that led to the frameworks and how schools can use it as part of school self-evaluation is absolutely critical to ensuring that this is a quality framework informed by participation, by democratic structures, by equality, by engaging the whole school community. And you'll see in the document launch today and in the story that's told around its development that there was consultation, there was a pilot, there was a real attempt to give ownership to the school communities and agency in both the articulation of the framework and in the way it's going to be used. And I want to commend Shivaun and the team for striking that balance. At the end of the video, certainly the version I saw, Sandra gave us a 3 C's. She says this framework offers clarity, and it represents those standards that Educate Together schools want to see in the ethos of their schools. It gives comfort in knowing that the founding vision has now been codified and is available to all schools. And it offers, she said, continuity, that third C, where Educate Together has come from and where it is going. So it offers clarity, it offers comfort, and it offers continuity. The temptation is too great, Sandra, for me not to offer a 4th C. And the 4th C, I suggest, is that it offers challenge, not just for Educate Together. I think there's a challenge there, but well beyond it. I think the challenge for Educate Together is to ensure that the quality, as the quality framework becomes used, that it remains connected to the process that generated it. that no one in an Educate Together school looks at this and goes, I must tick these boxes, I must find the evidence, and I must then put it away and say that it is complete. That it remains part of a living document within the Educate Together schools. And I think you'll hear from the people involved in the development of the framework that is the intention. Emer spoke very eloquently in the video as seeing the framework as a counterbalance to the drive to measure. That above all else, what it does is it offers an account of ethos in Educate Together schools that resists the measurable and the numeric. And I think that is an extremely important challenge that is faced by all quality frameworks. And I think that there's a real, it's a powerful voice to hear the leader of Educate Together endorse the standards for themselves and for what they represent, and not because they can be turned into a Likert scale. I think there's a challenge in the publication of the framework for the rest of the Irish school system as a whole, to think about how ethos is represented, that most intangible and taken for granted feature of schools, but that it is yet highly debated and highly contentious. But how is it represented by the diverse kinds of schools we have in the Irish system? You'll hear from Shivaun later how she is already working with the ETB sector, with Jesuit schools, on similar kinds of processes about how different kinds of schools want to represent ethos as part of school quality, not as something separate. Here's our efforts towards improvement, and our ethos is over here. And I think that opportunity to reposition ethos within quality rather than in a special and different place in the school, I think offers a challenge and an opportunity for the system as a whole. I think articulating shared values and attitudes is going to be an important activity for all schools into the future. And what the quality framework shows is that ethos is not something to have, but it is something that you do and something to be improved within the school community. A further challenge, I think, lies at the heart of the document, where there is a very brave and honest statement about the challenge to ensure that you close the gap, not the achievement gap, but the ethos gap between the ethos as intended and the ethos as experienced. And I found that that challenge at the heart of the document was one that's relevant to all schools in all systems. It's an honest admission that quality frameworks like this one that give teachers, the whole school community, the tools to begin to close that gap between what we want to do as a school and what we really do, between the intended and the experienced, by what's experienced by members of the school community, that seems a worthy objective for any quality project. I want to conclude my remarks by congratulating Shivaun and the team at EQI. What began as a conversation in this room, Sandra, I think, around what might be done to support Educate Together in this project has ended up as something quite historic within the Irish education system. Not just an effort at clarity, comfort and continuity for Educate Together, but a real challenge now across the school system to rethink how we think about and represent school ethos. And I think today is a big day for Educate Together, a big day for Shivaun and the team, but I think potentially a very significant day for the Irish school system as a whole. To recall the late Brendan Kennelly, nothing is ending here or finishing, it is but a beginning. Congratulations, Shivaun and the team, and I'm delighted to be associated with this launch today. Thank
you very much, Anne, for a typically insightful, challenging, and I think very hopeful analysis of not only the framework, but also of its potential to be transformative in an education system as a whole. We now move on to the video that Anne mentioned earlier on. And just while we're setting it up, I think it's important that we acknowledge the extraordinary amount of work that went into creating this video. We'd like to acknowledge the work in particular of the 6 teachers who were involved in it. Katie Murphy, Paula Murphy, Yvonne Comiskey, Michael Heffernan, Ruth Donald, and Sinead McDermott. Also to acknowledge the work of Emer Nolan and Sandra Irwin-Gowan from Educate Together, who facilitated this and organised it. And finally, to thank Ballywire Media Production Company and, of course, our own DCU Communications and Marketing Department, and especially Dara Hall, for the enormous professional technical competence they brought to this. To produce a good quality video is a challenging thing, and I think we agree they've produced a very good quality video. For those of you who want to see it once again after its inaugural presentation now, it will be available on the EQI website after this. So Shivaun, I offer the floor or the screen to you.
The background to the schools is that the first school was opened by a group of parents who in the 1970s wanted a school where their children could be educated together, where every child would be treated on an equal basis in the school and where no child was an outsider. So it was a long campaign, but the first school was established in Dublin in 1978. And since then, the movement has grown. We have 95 primary schools now in 21 counties, with one more opening this September. Then at second level, I suppose the campaigns started to emerge in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Parents wanted a second level option for their children to continue within the same ethos. And we opened the first 3 Educate Together second level schools in 2014, and there are 17 now around the country, including voluntary secondary schools and community colleges. So altogether, that's 117 schools in the network now, and there's about 33,000 students in them. What's interesting about the ethos is how well it stood the test of time. So the foundations on which the first schools were based back in the 1970s and 80s led to the development of a charter, and that charter has been in place now for 40 years. The schools are based on 4 ethos principles. The first is that they're equality-based, and that means that all children are guaranteed equality of access and esteem, regardless of their background, their social, cultural, religious background. The second principle is that schools are co-educational, and that means that stereotypes are challenged and every child is supported to reach their full potential, regardless of their identity. The third principle is that they are child-centred, and that doesn't just mean in teaching and learning, it means in all of the decisions that happen in the school. Children's interests are first and foremost. And finally, schools are democratically run, which in the early days meant a very strong focus on parental involvement. And then that has broadened out to encompass student participation, while also respecting the professional role of teachers. So it's a kind of a 3-way partnership, that democratic approach between teachers, parents and students.
We wanted to develop a quality framework for Ethos because Educate Together has been around for over 40 years. And in the beginning, it was really clear to the small number of schools what the model was and what they were trying to achieve. And over the years, as the network has grown, and particularly over the last 10 years, the network has grown quite rapidly, we needed to establish clarity over what the Educate Together ethos is and what that means in practice for schools. We knew we wanted to develop a quality framework that met the needs of our schools, and we talked to a number of different people, and we were delighted then to invite EQI to take this contract in developing the quality framework, because of the standing of the centre within DCU, because of the fantastic work that the centre had done in school evaluation and inspections, but particularly the work that Shivaun O'Brien had done before with Centres for Education, where she had developed a very similar approach and framework, and that gave us great confidence that something similar had been done before, albeit in a different context and maybe a different format. So we were delighted to have EQI and DCU, work with us on this. It also was important, I think, for a known, institution like DCU and EQI, for our schools to have the confidence that we were working with somebody who knew what they were doing and was very well established in this area.
EQI is the Centre for Evaluation, Quality and Inspection, and it's a research centre based at the DCU Institute of Education that looks at those three things. It looks at the issue of quality in education and looks at the mechanisms for achieving that, and two broadly based ones. One is evaluation and another is inspection.
This project presented a really interesting challenge. Like, Educate Together had come to us to ask us to develop a quality framework for Ethos, but yet there was very few examples of anything similar to look at. Like, school ethos is this idea that's really important for schools, but yet it's a relatively obscure idea. Like, some people would say that school ethos is really difficult to recognise, it's really difficult to measure, and it's also really difficult to improve. But that's exactly the challenge that we had been given.
We asked EQI to develop a framework for us that would be very clear, that would be a relatively easy lift for our schools, so that would fit into what schools already had to do, but that would also, give schools an opportunity to assess themselves against the Educate Together ethos.
What I proposed to Educate Together was to develop a quality framework, including a set of standards and statements of effective practice that was based on their charter. And then what I proposed was to develop a self-evaluation process, including detailed guidelines and a set of tools that teachers could use to gather data in each of their schools. And following that, I suggested that we would test out this process by piloting it in a number of primary and post-primary schools. SSE is a school improvement process that has been mandatory in Ireland since 2012. It follows the normal school improvement cycle, where teachers identify what they want to evaluate, they gather data, they develop a school self-evaluation report, a school improvement plan, and then most importantly, they implement those improvements. From research we've carried out here in EQI, we know that SSE can be really challenging for schools and for teachers. And over the years, we've tried to test out a number of models of professional development and support for schools that would make the process much easier for schools to engage with, and also to build capacity within the schools for SSE. We provided 4 training sessions which were based at the DCU Institute of Education and were attended by the teacher who was leading the SSE process in each of the schools. Each training session prepared the teachers to implement the next stage of the process back in their own schools.
We approached the inspectorate and told them what we were doing, and we were delighted that they came on board and allowed the pilot schools, because we had 20 pilot schools who were piloting this approach over the course of a year, and the department allowed them to recognise that as their formal SSE for that year.
The support from DCU was amazing. Each of the information sessions and training sessions were so well prepared. We had guidelines that were really clear that we could use in our meetings. There were step-by-step everything that we were supposed to do. There were sample questionnaires, there was sample targets, there were everything that you might need. There was also support from the facilitators if we needed to speak to anybody. Everyone was always available on email. It was amazing support and made the process really, really easy.
For me, I just found the support absolutely excellent from day one. I suppose I hadn't much experience with SSE in general, so I felt very confident from day one, having attended the seminar the first day. And then the guidelines and the information provided to the school, everything on the Google Drive, everything shared, was very informative. And it gave us a great start.
DCU provided a number of things in way of support. First of all, Shivaun O'Brien is the person who was leading and the person who was helping us. And Shivaun is someone who's, I know, has been involved and is passionate about SSE for a number of years. So to be able to bring that knowledge and to be able to kind of link up the theory and the practice, I think was really interesting for us.
I thought the training programme was very practical and relevant to each step of the process, and it was a supportive environment where we could listen to other teachers' experiences of leading SSE within their school.
First off, it was reassuring from the get-go. The very first meeting at that pilot meeting, when we were given the framework and a very clear layout of exactly what steps would be involved, it just meant that, I suppose, like I said earlier, with that I suppose, overwhelming feeling just went immediately, because you could see very clearly exactly what the expectations were, and it was broken down into very clear steps.
the quality standards, because they mapped to the Looking at Our Schools framework. It meant you could immediately see how they could be implemented in a school self-evaluation process. And then the resources, again, it was kind of a starting point where you could develop your own surveys and your own questionnaires. And then you also had the actual template for school self-evaluation, which actually laid out exactly how to go about the process.
Having a quality framework after 40 years, I mean, it's early days, but we hope it might be a kind of a coming of age for the organisation. So writing down what it is that you do in some ways feels quite concrete. It gives us a bit of confidence and to stand up and say, this is what our schools are about. And that's very important because we need to grow. All of our schools are still heavily oversubscribed. There's far more demand for Educate Together schools than we can meet at the moment. And having a really clear framework helps other people see exactly what it is Educate Together schools are. And it also gives us a focus for our work to support ethos and to support quality as we grow. The second thing I would say is that there is I suppose, what I would see as a dangerous push towards measurement and maybe a negative impact of an idea of standards in education. I think globally, in Ireland, that manifests itself as a very strong focus on exams. Exams are understood to be the standards in some ways, and at second level especially, and there is, I suppose, a dangerous increase in focus on standardised testing at primary as well. So what this gives us is an alternative set of standards. We can say, this is what we want to do, this is what's important to us, including every child, promoting equality, engaging students in decision making. These are the things that matter to us. And if we have a set of standards to strive for, it makes it easier to keep the focus on that.
I'm really thrilled that we have a really comprehensive set of tools for our Educate Together schools, ranging from guidance around our ethos, but then also obviously the quality framework, which includes a whole set of tools for schools to self-evaluate themselves on the Educate Together ethos, and that will have enormous impact going forward into the future. I mean, I summarise it kind of with 3 C's, that it gives the National Office and Educate Together network and the schools clarity around the Educate Together ethos, what the 4 principles stand for. It also then provides the schools comfort when they do carry out an SSE in ethos, comfort to know where they are in terms of that ethos standard, and also comfort to know that they have a plan as to how they can improve, comfort to affirm themselves in the good practice that they're doing. And also then finally continuity. The framework, the quality framework, provides schools with the continuity of self-evaluation, a continuous process of self-evaluation and school improvement, which is very much, what we're trying to achieve for schools, but also very much aligned, of course, with what the department is trying to do and trying to build that practice of good skills in school improvement and self-evaluation.
I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to be involved in this process, to work with the staff in Educate Together National Office and particularly the teachers in each of the schools engaged in the pilot phase. Educate Together as a patron body is a custodian for a set of values for this network of schools, which reflect a set of shared global values which are about promoting a sustainable, equitable and fair society. So I'm really delighted that I had this opportunity to be involved in this initiative and to contribute in some small way to the promotion of these values in schools.
At the core of any educational research is the capacity to impact and influence the reality in schools. So as a research centre, EQI really wants to be in a situation where we're doing impactful research that has a meaningful role in changing education provision at all levels across the continuum of education. And the opportunity to work with Educate Together is a really critically important one for us in this way, because as a school patron body, as a body who has direct control and direct influence on the day-to-day nature of education for many children and many school communities, they're a centrally important grouping for us to be engaged with. Many thanks for that, Shivaun, and many thanks to all of the colleagues who contributed to that, I think, really wonderful summary of not only the project, but also where it came from, who was involved with it, and perhaps where it may be going as well. I'd now like to introduce the person who was central to the overall process and who was mentioned many times in the video, very legitimately as the core of the EQI role and the DCU Institute of Education role in this. It's my colleague and friend, Professor Shivaun O'Brien. She's Associate Professor in the School of Policy and Practice and Associate Dean for Professional Development and Partnership. And she was the principal investigator and leader of the process that saw the emergence of the Educate Together Ethos Quality Framework. And as you've probably sensed from the video and from the conversation today, this in some ways is the culmination of 20 years of work for Shivaun. She's been hugely committed to the idea of evaluation and self-evaluation and working with teachers and schools and school communities to allow them take ownership of this process and to allow them develop the skills and the competences that can see evaluation and self-evaluation as being critical parts of what they do, but what they do rather than have it done to themselves. So Shivaun, the floor is yours.
It has been an absolute privilege to be involved in this process right from the start, and it's 2 years in the making. We actually would have liked to have launched this prior to this, but of course COVID got in the way. And that video that you just saw was shot last June, when we weren't able to access schools and we weren't able to, ask students about their opinion on all of this. And I suppose we were limited in what we could include in the video, but nonetheless, I'm really happy that we have recorded this development. And as Joe said, the longer version of the video is available on the EQI website, should you be interested in looking at that. One of the things I just want to say about something that I mentioned in the video, and that was that Ethos has this reputation for being this really kind of tricky concept, an idea that, as I said in the video, it's difficult to measure and it's difficult to define and it's difficult to evaluate. But I'm not convinced that I believe that anymore. And particularly from my work over the 2 years with Educate Together and my work with patron bodies in the meantime, the different networks of schools that I'm working with now, teasing out their ethos. I think it's time to maybe debunk that myth that ethos has to be this kind of slippery concept. And I suppose that's all I'm going to say about ethos for now. What I really want to talk about in this presentation is the work that we did in the second year of this initiative. So in the first year, we consulted widely with all the stakeholders and we developed the ethos standards and statements. But in the second year, we actually led 20 schools through the piloting of a school self-evaluation process for ethos. So that's really what I want to talk to you about. And I want to talk about what informed the approach that we used to professional development. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk to you about that. And I'm going to share a few slides. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about the whole idea of research around this topic. School self-evaluation has been written about extensively. And one of the things that is often mentioned is that schools and teachers, whether it's in Ireland or internationally, have many challenges in implementing school self-evaluation. The literature also gives us a huge amount of ideas and solutions to how we might tackle this. And one of the main ways in which they suggest we tackle this is to design professional development for teachers that is specific to supporting them to implement and lead SSE. And there's a growing body of literature on this, particularly in relation to supporting teachers to engage in what's called data-driven decision-making and to develop data literacy. And while all that is very useful, I find that most of what you read still doesn't really apply, in a practical way to the Irish context. And for that reason, I felt that I wanted to engage in more research myself on the topic. So I suppose I like theory, but I'm more interested in applying theory to practice. And as Joe said, I've been working in this area over the past 20 years. And since school self-evaluation was introduced as a mandatory requirement in 2012, I was really interested in getting into schools and seeing, well, how do schools implement this in practice? How do they go through those 6 steps of an SSE process? How do they figure out how much time is involved? How do they figure out how many meetings they should have. What should they do in between meetings? Like, surely there's some way of putting this in kind of practical terms. And this was something that I was really interested in looking at. And my research on this area, I suppose, has two phases. And the first phase is where I went into schools and I asked them, would it be okay if I led the SSE process in your schools? And I was very fortunate that several schools allowed me to do that. And that gave me the opportunity to test out those practical applications of SSE, the number of meetings and so on. And I was able to tweak that. And after that phase was over, I was able to develop a professional development program for teachers, particularly the teacher who would be leading the SSE process in a school. And I tried to figure out what would help that teacher most in the leading of an SSE process in a school. And it was all the learning that came out of that we used in the support that we provided to the 20 Educate Together schools in this pilot. Now, the model itself has been tested numerous times. I'd say well over 100 times. I have trained teachers from schools in how to lead the SSE process using this approach. And I suppose we just felt that it was fairly effective and we felt it was useful to use it again. One thing that is important to say is that I'm not talking about another school self-evaluation process. We are talking about the self-evaluation process that is already embedded in schools that is up and running since 2012. And we try to mirror that, the language of that in the development of the Ethos quality standards. We use the terms like domain, standards, statements of effective practice. And we tried very much to align what we did with what was already in place, because it made sense not to have another SSE process, another internal evaluation process, but rather one that mapped what schools were already doing. Other things that research asks us to consider is the practical realities of school. And this comes up time and time again in research on school self-evaluation and also on professional development for school self-evaluation. And what we know is that schools are really busy places. They have a whole range of competing pressures, different things that they're required to do. So that makes me think about how much time should a school have for a school self-evaluation process within a given year? And how does it balance that between doing a self-evaluation process really well? And I suppose there's a balance there. And I suppose that's ultimately what I was trying to do, to develop a process that would take into consideration these two sides of the coin. And another reality that we have to consider is that the person leading SSE in a school is usually a teacher. And from our own research, a teacher who has been, who is full-time in the classroom, who has either volunteered or who has been asked to lead the SSE process in a particular year. And certainly in our own pilot phase with Educate Together, the vast majority of those teachers from primary and post-primary schools had never led an SSE process before. And while I'm well aware that there are increasing numbers of posts of responsibility and teachers who are more and more experienced in leading SSE, there's still quite a number of teachers who are continuing to lead it for the first time in Ireland. And I suppose if you look at that teacher, they are busy, they are, feeling very confident about teaching in their classroom. But when it comes to leading a whole school improvement process, they are less confident. And sometimes the whole thing can feel overwhelming. So in designing this self-evaluation professional development approach, it was that teacher that we had in mind in terms of how we designed the process. So what the research again tells us time and time again is that we should make sure that we provide step-by-step detailed instructions addressing all those things I mentioned earlier about how many meetings, what should happen in each meeting, is there an agenda or work to be done in each meeting, what should the person leading have to do in between meetings, what instructions would they give to their SSE team members about what has to be done next. So all of those things were, I suppose, some of the issues that I tried to include in the guidelines that was provided to Educate Together schools. And I certainly am not talking about let's get it done as quickly as possible. Let's tick that box and say you very quickly got that SSE process done. That's not what I was aiming for at all. While we certainly want to consider the practical realities of school and the limits with time, we also wanted to make sure that it was a really effective process, that it really led to improvement, and that it was going to lead to the increased likelihood that the actions would be implemented. Otherwise, what is the point? So these were kind of the factors we had to consider in the design. Ultimately, my bottom line is make it easy. Make it easy for teachers leading the SSE process, provide them with these detailed guidelines, provide them with the suite of tools that they'll need in order to carry out this evaluation in the school, but also make it easy for school management, make it easy for the principal and the deputy principal, so they know what the process will involve, how much time commitment and resources it will require, and so on. So these are kind of, I suppose, more of the factors we considered. One of the other approaches that we feel is very important is in terms of the training that we provide what we call just-in-time support. And this just means that we don't train the teachers, and tell them at the start how to do everything. SSE is a 6-step process, and it is useful to approach it in this way, that you train them how to do the first bit first and let them do that before you get them to focus on the next step of the process. And that is something that we used in the design of this as well. And just to look at it a little bit more, it's very important that the support was sustained over the entire year. So if teachers started the training program in September, that they continued to be supported right through until they completed their school improvement plan. So what that meant in this pilot is that teachers attended a training program in September, and then they went back to their schools, set up their team, had their first meetings, and they felt really confident how they would facilitate that meeting, because that was the focus of the first training session. Then they came back to the second training session. They talked about how they got on at in the first attempt to start the SSE process in their school. And then we focused on how they would do the next part of the process. So this step-by-step sustained support is another key aspect. We all know that best professional development is when it's active and when it's applied. And I feel that the teachers in this process learned how to lead SSE by leading SSE. And it is very difficult to train teachers how to lead SSE in theory, or just to give them samples of data, or to show them examples of best practice. They really need to do it the first time at least before they feel confident in doing it. The other factor, and we were very familiar with this, the importance of collaboration. And collaboration was built into this process by making sure that every time the teachers met, that they had an opportunity to reflect on how things went in their school, and they shared this experience with each other. And they identified very often issues or problems that arose, and they provided solutions to each other about how they can address that. And I think that collaboration was really important. And the fact that the 20 teachers were all going through the same process at the same time and hitting the same challenges at the same time meant that they were really in the same space in terms of sharing best practice and sharing ideas with each other. And I think that's the last one. So I suppose overall what I wanted to say is that the approach to professional development hasn't just happened all of a sudden. It has been as a result of research and our own research and international research and research we've read and applied for many years now, and that has formed the basis of how we do this. One of the things that people often ask me is, do I believe that a one size fits all? And I would say absolutely not. I do not. It may appear that I think a one size fits all, but I certainly do not agree with that. What I feel is that there are a lot of teachers who are leading this process for the very first time, and they certainly need this kind of step-by-step approach. But certainly once their confidence is built, once they've had this first experience of implementing all the parts of an SSE process, they can certainly go ahead and innovate and change it and do it differently all the other times. So I suppose this has a particular application for teachers at a particular phase in their development and understanding of how to lead SSE, I would suggest. So Joe, I'm going to finish up now, but I just want to say thank you so much everybody for being here today, and thanks again to all the schools. I work closely with Sandra and Gowan, and it was a pure joy to work with Sandra right through the 2 years, and we're continuing to work on other projects as well. So thanks very much everybody for your attention, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Joe.
Any thanks for that, Shivaun. I think we've all seen there that Shivaun has a deep theoretical understanding of this issue, but also has a profound practical commitment to make it as easy and as user-friendly as possible. And for any of us who have ever done anything in relation to school intervention or school improvement, making it easy is really complicated for the person who's trying to make it easy. So well done to Shivaun for doing that. Just before we go ahead to the final speaker, Dr. Emer Nolan, I'd like to acknowledge that the president of DCU, Professor Dara Keogh, has joined us, as well as a professional interest in education and educational quality. I know Dara has a deep personal interest in issues in relation to quality and ethos in schools as well. So it's fantastic to have you here, Dara. Many thanks for taking the time to be here. I just want now to come to the final speaker of the day, Dr. Emer Nolan. Emer has been CEO of Educate Together since February 2020, but prior to that, she's had an extensive professional engagement with education in Ireland for a long number of years, and many of us know her in many different guises and many different roles. Her recent experience includes the establishment of the Migrant Teacher Project in the Marino Institute of Education and lecturing in the School of Education in UCD in areas of equality, in education, and in children's rights and participation. So we're delighted to have Emer speak with us today. And Emer, I give the floor to you.
Thanks very much, Joe and Shivaun and Anne. I'm actually going to try and be brief. Most of what I would have said has already been said. I mean, really, I just want to thank a few people and maybe to talk a little bit about why this quality framework is so important to us. And thanks, Anne, for making us think about that term quality framework, because it's become very familiar to us now after the last couple of years, but it took us a very, very long time to get to this point in Educate Together for exactly the reasons that you outlined at the beginning, Anne. Not everybody is comfortable in the education sector talking about the idea of a quality framework. It feels like imported language somehow. So thanks for pointing that out. But yeah, it's great to have got to this point. As Shivaun has touched on, there are actually 3 elements, if you like, to our quality framework. And it's been great to hear from some of the teachers who were involved in the school self-evaluation element of it. I kind of like to think of it as a kind of a triangle. So we've got the standards, we've got the school self-evaluation tool, and then we have an ethos quality guidance platform as well. So, from the beginning, all 3 elements of the quality framework would have been very important to us. The standards, first of all, just to say a little bit about them. So we were a long time, I suppose, writing down the standards for a lot of reasons that have already been touched on here as a bottom-up organization, very much a grassroots organization, I suppose, for the right reasons. There might have been a reluctance to write down, a standard and to use that word standard. So actually the language that we were able to borrow from the school self-evaluation process around statements of effective practice was very helpful in getting us that far. And we're in the very comfortable position, to use Sandra's word, comfort, where our members, because we're a membership organization, so as a patron body, we're a democratic organization. Our members, do have a very strong voice, I suppose, in governance. Our members adopted our statements of effective practice in May of this year, and that's a really important element of the quality framework for us. And all 3 elements are important: the standards, the SSE tool, and then the ethos guidance platform as well. But really back to the thank yous. The very first people to thank, and we touched on this in the video, are really the founders of the first Educate Together school, the Dalkey School project. The importance of the really foundational work that they did before the first school opened and in the early years of development really can't be understated, because the principles that they established have stood the test of time, based on core human rights values that then became enshrined in the Educate Together Charter. It's the convergence and the strong support for those core principles that have enabled us to engage in this work around quality, and for the network really to come together to write down these standards and to develop these tools. The next thank you is to my predecessor, Paul Rowe, who I think may be here this afternoon, I hope so, and other former colleagues who secured the funding to develop this framework. So, we're absolutely delighted to be able to work with DCU, with a professional organisation with such great knowledge and skill in the area. We just wouldn't have been able to do that, as a charity. Everything we do in the National Office and Educate Together needs financial support. Everything we do to support our schools and to add value to the network needs funding, and we're very grateful to Salesforce the technology company who funded this work in the first place. And as I say, I'm very grateful to my colleagues, to Paul and other people who were here before me in making that happen. But back to the standards, and Anne touched on it here, so I'll just gloss over it, but we do very much see these statements of effective practice, these standards, as an important counterbalance to that trend that others have mentioned towards measuring the success of education in very narrow terms, in terms of very narrow academic outcomes, the results of exams and standardized tests. We'd see our ethos standards and statements of effective practice as helpful in defending, I suppose, the importance of every aspect of a holistic education. So the importance of ethos, the importance of well-being, the importance of relationships. And we hope that having this framework now will give school leaders and staff in schools and school communities a structure which will help them in their work to keep the focus on the students and on education in its broadest sense. Just coming back to the other elements then of the quality framework just briefly, possibly more important than the standards are the tools, and Shivaun's talked in some at length there about the school self-evaluation tool, which is obviously very valuable to school communities. But as a kind of a bottom-up organisation or grassroots organisation, the tools were nearly more important to us, because it is really important to us that schools maintain their autonomy and their freedom to innovate in the area of equality. So, back to Anne's challenge, if you like, that this shouldn't become a tick box exercise from the very beginning. It's always been designed as a bottom up, as a tools and supports for ethos rather than a measurement tool. While also having that aspect of evaluation though, because, for schools, as Sandra said, schools do want the comfort of knowing that, they're going about this the right way. And it just in terms of those tools, the Ethos guidance platform that was also developed, I suppose, in parallel to the Ethos self-evaluation tool and to the standards. I do also just want to thank Aoife Blood, who was a seconded staff member from City West Educate Together, who led that aspect of the work. And we're very keen now, I suppose, to pick up that aspect of the work and to make that Ethos guidance platform become a dynamic tool that our schools can use to figure out the tricky questions and to continue to engage in that process that people have talked about as being so important, that really it's the process of quality that matters, the process of ethos, the process of working out, what do we do about Christmas? How are we ensuring that the quieter student voices are being listened to? How are we ensuring that the voices of our autistic students are being listened to and being heard? So our Ethos guidance platform has some really good examples of good practice in the area, but it doesn't have all the answers. So because it's not a tick box, there isn't one way of doing things. And, as others have said, very often the process of working out the answer is as important as the policy a school arrives at from an ethos perspective. And in the same way, the process of developing this quality framework has been just as important as the lovely documents and tools that we have now as a learning exercise for us as an organisation. The biggest challenge for Educate Together is always meeting demand. Our schools are heavily oversubscribed. We're always looking for new ways to grow our network and to meet the demand that's there. And one pathway we've been exploring in recent years, alongside opening new Educate Together schools in areas of growing population, is that we've started working with existing schools that may wish to adopt the Educate Together ethos. And again, the framework, the standards, the statements of effective practice, and these tools are really, really important in that work. We've already been able to use them, for example, in partnerships that we're developing with City of Dublin ETB. And they give us a really strong framework and a really clear set of examples that we can use in that work. We have a kind of an ethos audit, if you like, that we can use at the beginning of a partnership process. So there's going to be huge uses for us. The process has been fantastic in terms of bringing the network together. Back to the final few thank yous. Obviously, huge thanks go to DCU EQI and in particular to Shivaun, not only for your huge expertise in this area, in the area of school self-evaluation, Shivaun, but also, I suppose, the heart and soul that you've put into the work, and for your long-standing interest and support for Educate Together's work. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it, and to everyone in DCU EQI. Also absolutely central to the successful development of the tool were the 20 schools who participated in the pilot. I want to thank everyone from these schools. While I know they appreciated the support and they spoke very clearly about that in the video, there was a time commitment, a huge time commitment in supporting this process, and we're very appreciative of that. And for the schools' positive feedback on the SSE process, which we hope will encourage other schools to engage in SSE and Ethos SSE in the future. Because as things, continue to normalise post-pandemic, we do hope to be in a position to support further communities of practice within our network who want to work on common areas of interest in ethos evaluation, whether that's on ethical education or student voice or some other aspect of ethos using these tools. And we also want to further develop our ethos guidance platform so that it becomes that dynamic tool for not just for ethos, but for collaboration and for sharing of good practice. We're very appreciative of the support of the inspectorate in this development. I think we all realise we're quite lucky in Ireland in having the quality of inspectorate that we have in resisting that global pressure to narrow down our forms of measurement. And we've certainly been very appreciative of the support for our SSE process, and we hope that may continue into the future so that more schools can be assured that ethos self-evaluation is important and that it can be integrated into other SSE themes, including on teaching and learning and leadership and management and so on. And I'm just going to wrap up. I'm conscious of everybody's time, but I do just have to thank one last person who has led this project from beginning to end, through thick and thin, I suppose, from securing the funding in the first place, developing this partnership with DCU, engaging the schools, overseeing the development of all three elements of the quality framework, and championing the SSE tools in particular across our network and beyond. And that is Sandra Irwin-Gowran. I don't know if anybody noticed, but when the meeting started, all of us from Educate Together who joined the meeting were named Sandra Irwin-Gowran, and that was kind of appropriate because she has been central to this all the way through. So thank you, Sandra, for this and for all your work to support and develop ethos in our schools and to promote equality-based education in the broadest sense. So I'll leave it there with just thanks to everyone, and delight, I suppose, in our new framework, and looking forward to using it to its full potential.
Many thanks for that, Emer, and for that excellent overview, not only of the framework, but also how it fits into the Educate Together mission, idea, and ethos. So I think it's very important for us to have that contextual understanding. So it just falls to me now to thank everybody for attending today. There was well over 100 of you on this webinar, which I think shows the real interest in this issue from across the Irish education system. So it's been a pleasure to host you. Many thanks to everybody who's been involved in organising it. To Conor Sullivan, who organised the technical side of it, to all of the support that we've received from DCU, to all of the support that we've received from the wider Educate Together community, to particularly acknowledge once again the schools and the school communities for all the work that they've done to get us to this point. This is a cooperative process. It's one that sees us reach a point together, I think, and it's one that I think we want to acknowledge in that way. It's not being done to anybody, it's emerged organically from an organisation, and I think that's a fantastic thing to see for Irish education in general. So to thank our three speakers as well, to thank Professor Anne Looney, Professor Shivaun O'Brien and Dr. Emer Nolan for their really insightful inputs into this whole process. And please do go and look at the EQI website and look at the video that's been produced, both the short version that you saw, but also the longer version, which is a really in-depth analysis and understanding of where we came from. And we look forward to engaging with all of you on this really important topic in the future. So thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.